The rain over Shinjuku hit the restaurant windows like static, and Marin Whitfield balanced 4 plates along her arm without letting a single glass of wine tip past its rim. The dining room glowed amber, all dark wood and low light, the kind of restaurant where the silence between forks cost more than most people's rent. She had worked the night shift at UME for 8 months, long enough to know which tables tipped well and which ones watched her hands too closely. Table 12 was the second kind tonight. 4 men sat there, dressed like the room had been built around them instead of the other way. The one facing the door wore a charcoal suit with no tie, his collar open just enough to show the edge of ink along his throat, black lines disappearing beneath fabric like something that had chosen to stay hidden. He had not looked up once since he arrived.
He did not need to.
The other 3 men adjusted themselves whenever he shifted, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. Marin set down the last plate and stepped back before he finally lifted his eyes to her. They were dark, almost black in this light, and they moved over her without hurry, cataloging rather than admiring. His name was Sato Rinji, though she would not learn that until later. Right now he was only the man with the quiet hands and a scar through one eyebrow that no amount of tailoring could soften. "You," he said. His voice was low, unbothered, the voice of a man who had never once had to raise it to be heard. "Come here." She approached the table with the practiced calm of someone who had learned not to flinch. "Is something wrong with the food, sir?"
No.
He reached into his jacket and set an envelope on the white tablecloth, the paper heavy, the seal broken already. Beside it, he placed a folded slip of paper, and beside that, a check written out in a hand so precise it looked engraved. $1 million. American. "I have a game for you. Read this letter aloud. If you can, this is yours." The other men at the table laughed, low and knowing, the kind of laughter shared by people certain of an outcome before it happens. One of them, a heavy-set man with a gold watch too loose on his wrist, said something to Rinji in Japanese, something about wasting good sake on a joke. Marin's spine straightened, but her face gave away nothing. She had spent 4 years at a university in Tokyo, 3 of them fighting to be taken seriously in seminar rooms full of men who assumed a black American girl had wandered into the wrong building. She had learned then to let people underestimate her. It had never once cost her anything to let them keep believing what was convenient. She picked up the letter. The characters were formal, old-fashioned, the kind of vocabulary used only in documents meant to carry weight. A declaration. A warning. Names she recognized from things she was never supposed to overhear from the kitchen staff, rival syndicates, territory lines drawn in blood instead of ink. Her pulse kicked once, hard, and she made herself breathe evenly before she spoke. "This is a formal letter from the Kurosawa family," she said, her voice steady, her pronunciation clean and unhesitating, "informing you that the shipment routes through the harbor district are no longer under your protection as of the 1st of the month. It states that this was decided among the elders and is not open for negotiation. It closes with a warning that any attempt to reclaim the routes will be treated as an act of war." The table went silent in a way that had weight to it, a silence that pressed against her ribs. Rinji had not moved, but something behind his eyes had changed entirely, the way a lock changes when the correct key finally turns. "Say that again," he said quietly, slowly. She repeated it, word for word, watching the 3 other men exchange glances that had lost all their earlier amusement. The heavy-set man's hand drifted toward his jacket and stopped only when Rinji lifted 2 fingers off the table, a motion so small she almost missed it, and yet it was enough to still the entire room. "Where," Rinji asked, "did a waitress in Shinjuku learn to read a war declaration written for men who expect never to be understood by anyone outside their own circle?" "University," she said simply. "For years. I studied literature, not politics." "And yet you understood politics perfectly." "I understood grammar." The politics explained itself. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. He studied her for a long moment, long enough that the other men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unused to their boss allowing silence to stretch when a threat sat exposed on the table between them. "You will not be working here tomorrow," he said finally. Marin's stomach dropped, certain for one cold second that she had just cost herself the only steady paycheck keeping her afloat in a city that chewed through foreigners without noticing. "Sir, I need this job." "You misunderstand." He folded the letter closed with 2 fingers, precise, unhurried. "You will not be working here, because you will be working for me. Consider tonight your last shift as a waitress." "I never agreed to that." "No," he said, and this time the almost smile reached fully into place, sharp and unreadable. "You didn't. That is the interesting part." He rose from the table, taller than she had expected, the room seeming to recalibrate itself around the simple act of him standing. He left the check on the table beside the letter, untouched, as if money had never been the actual currency of the conversation. "Keep the check regardless," he said. "Consider it payment for the reading. My offer for your future employment is separate, and it comes with considerably better terms." "I don't know anything about your business," Marin said, low enough that only he could hear it. "And I would like to keep it that way." "You know Japanese well enough to read a war letter without stumbling on a single syllable," he said. "That makes you already more valuable than half the men in my organization. Whether you know it or not, you are already involved. The only question now is whether you are involved on my side of the table, where I decide what happens to you, or on the outside of it, where the Kurosawa family decides instead. I would think carefully before choosing the second option." The threat sat there plainly between them, wrapped in perfect courtesy, and Marin understood in that instant that the letter she had read out loud had not been a game at all. It had been a test, and whatever answer she had given had already changed the shape of her life before she had time to consent to the transaction. He left a card on the table beside the check, black with a single phone number embossed in silver, no name attached. "Call before midnight," he said. "After that, I cannot guarantee the Kurosawa family will wait for you to make up your mind." Then he was gone, his men falling into step behind him without a word, the restaurant exhaling around his absence like a held breath finally released. Marin stood frozen beside the table for a long moment, the card cool between her fingers, the check beside it worth more than 2 years of her salary, and beneath both of them, the folded letter that had just made her a target in a war she had not known existed an hour ago. She did not call before midnight. She called at 11:51, standing outside the restaurant's service entrance in the rain, her uniform soaked through, her hands steady even though nothing else in her was. He answered on the second ring. "You waited longer than I expected. I wanted to make sure I wasn't making a mistake." "And are you?" "I don't know yet." She watched a car idle at the far end of the alley, headlights off, and something in her chest went cold and alert at once. "There's a black sedan parked across from the restaurant. It's been there since you left." A pause, brief and precise. "Do not move. Stay where the light reaches you." Within 90 seconds, a second car arrived, sleek and unmarked, and a man stepped out who moved with the same economical stillness Renji had at the table. He said nothing, only opened the rear door and waited. Marin looked once more at the sedan across the street, its engine now running, and made the decision that would define the rest of her year in the space of a single breath. She got in the car. The apartment Renji kept above the harbor district was nothing like she expected, no gaudy excess, only clean lines and low light, a single wall of glass overlooking water black as ink. He was waiting there when the driver brought her up, standing at the window with his back to the door, jacket removed, sleeves rolled to the forearm, more ink visible now, deliberate and old, telling a story she could not yet read. "The Kurosawa family knows your face," he said without turning around. "They knew it before you finished reading the letter. Whoever wrote that message wanted it read by someone unexpected. They wanted witnesses who could not be dismissed as simply my own people repeating my own words." "You mean I was set up?" "I mean you were chosen." He turned then, and the low light carved his features into something sharper, more honest than the restaurant had allowed. "I did not choose you tonight for the reading, Miss Whitfield. I chose you 3 weeks ago, when my people first noticed a university-educated translator working double shifts as a waitress to pay off a dead father's medical debt. Tonight was only the moment I decided to stop watching and start acting." The mention of her father landed like a blow she had not braced for. "You've been having me followed. I have been having you protected," he said. There is a difference, though. I understand why it does not feel that way tonight. It feels exactly the same from where I'm standing. Then let me be plain instead of careful. He crossed the room slowly, stopping at a distance that still allowed her room to breathe, though nothing about his presence made breathing simple. The Kurosawa family sent that letter to provoke me into a war I have spent 2 years avoiding. If you had read it wrong tonight, or refused to read it at all, they would have taken that as weakness and moved on us within the week. Because you read it perfectly, they now know I have someone in my orbit who understands them completely. That makes you valuable to me and dangerous to them in equal measure. I would rather you understand the danger from inside my protection than discover it alone. And if I say no, if I walk out of here and go back to my life, then I will not stop you, he said, and something in his voice suggested the words cost him more than he wanted to admit. But I will not be able to guarantee what happens to you after, and I think you already know that. Marin looked past him to the window, to the water below moving black and endless, and thought of her father's hospital bills still not fully paid, of the university degree she had taken out loans to earn and never used the way she had planned, of 8 months serving wine to men who never once looked at her long enough to remember her face. She thought of the way this man had looked at her instead, cataloging her competence rather than her body, and hated how much that single distinction mattered to her already. I need time, she said. You have until morning, he answered. There is a room down the hall. It locks from the inside, not the outside. That was deliberate. She noticed, despite everything, that he had said it like it mattered whether she believed him. Morning came gray and slow, and Marin woke in a bed unfamiliar enough that for one disoriented second she forgot where the danger had started. She dressed in clothes someone had left folded at the foot of the bed, dark and simple, nothing that announced wealth the way Renji's suits did, and found him already in the main room, a tablet open in front of him, 3 men standing at a respectful distance. The Kurosawa family filed a formal complaint against my organization this morning, he said without looking up. Not through the usual channels. Through legitimate legal counsel, in English, referencing a translator who exposed confidential correspondence. They're trying to make it official, Marin said slowly, understanding arriving cold and clear. They want it documented that I saw the letter. That way if anything happens to me, it looks like it was already public record. Yes. He set the tablet down and finally met her eyes. You are more valuable to them as a liability than as a threat. A witness they can point to, a foreigner they can claim was coerced into cooperation. It removes any accusation of dishonor from their actions if they decide you are inconvenient. So, they want me dead, and they've already built the excuse. I intend to make certain that excuse is never used. His voice did not rise, did not sharpen, and somehow that made the promise more absolute than if he had shouted it. But I need you to trust the process I am about to put in motion, even when parts of it will not make sense to you immediately. You keep asking me to trust you, Marin said, and you haven't given me a single reason to yet beyond a very expensive dinner and a room that locks from the wrong side. Something flickered across his expression, close to respect.
Fair, he said.
Then let me give you one honest thing instead of another promise. My younger sister translated for our organization for 6 years before the Kurosawa family discovered what she was doing for me. She was not protected the way I intend to protect you. I have not made that mistake since, and I do not intend to make it now. The admission sat heavy in the room, unadorned by grief or performance, simply stated the way a man states a fact he has made peace with only on the surface. Marin did not ask what happened to his sister. She understood from the stillness in his jaw that the answer was not one either of them needed spoken aloud this morning. All right, she said finally. I'll stay.
For now.
But I want to understand what I'm actually agreeing to, step by step, not secondhand from your men. Agreed, Renji said, and for the first time since the restaurant, something like relief moved through his shoulders, brief and quickly hidden. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Marin had not expected to adjust to as quickly as she did. She translated documents in a converted study 2 floors below Renji's penthouse, correspondence intercepted from rival families, shipping manifests written in deliberately archaic phrasing meant to confuse anyone without her specific education. She was good at it, better than good, and the quiet satisfaction of being genuinely needed for her mind rather than her availability to carry plates was a feeling she had not realized she missed until it returned. Renji kept his distance during the day, present only in the careful instructions relayed through his lieutenant, a sharp-eyed man named Hiro, who treated Marin with a wary respect that suggested he was still deciding whether she was an asset or a liability. It was in the evenings that Renji appeared, always briefly, always with some pretext of checking her work, though she began to notice he lingered longer than the pretext required. "Your handwriting changes when you're translating something you disagree with," he said one night, standing over her shoulder as she worked through a letter threatening a supplier who had switched allegiance to the Kurosawa family. "It gets sharper, angrier." "I don't like threats dressed up as poetry," she said without looking up. "It's dishonest." "Say what you mean." "Most men in my world would say, that is exactly the point of the poetry. Deniability wrapped in beauty. Most men in your world sound exhausting to negotiate with." That earned the closest thing to a real laugh she had heard from him, low and short, gone almost before it arrived. "You are the only person in this building who speaks to me like I am simply a man with an unusual job. Would you prefer I treat you like something else?" "No," he said, quieter now, and the space between them seemed to shrink without either of them stepping closer. "I would prefer you keep doing exactly what you are doing." She felt the weight of his attention settle over her like heat from a window left open too long in summer, unwanted and yet impossible to move away from entirely. She did not look up from the page, though her pen stopped moving for one traitorous second before she forced her hand steady again. The rooftop garden above the penthouse became her place to breathe when the weight of translated threats grew too heavy to carry inside four walls. It was there, 3 weeks into her uneasy new life, that the first true attack came. She heard it before she understood it, a sharp crack against the stone planter beside her, chips of concrete stinging her forearm before her mind caught up to the fact that someone had just fired a rifle from the building across the water. She dropped low on instinct, the way her father had taught her hunting upstate as a girl, and crawled toward the low wall separating the garden from open air, her heart slamming against her ribs in time with each impossible second. Hiro reached her within moments, hauling her flat against the wall while barking orders into a radio, and then Renji was there too, faster than she thought a man his size should move, his body positioned instantly between her and the direction of the shots without a single wasted motion. "Stay down," he said, low and controlled despite the chaos, his hand firm against her shoulder. "They're testing whether I will expose myself protecting you. Do not give them a clean shot at either of us." "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook more than she wanted it to. "I'm fine, just get down. You're still exposed." "I am aware." He did not move. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it started, the shooter either satisfied or spooked into retreat, and the garden fell into a silence, made unbearable by how loud the previous minute had been. Renji finally allowed himself to crouch fully beside her, his hand moving from her shoulder to cup the side of her face, checking for injury with a thoroughness that had nothing performative in it. "You are not hurt," he said, more statement than question, relief threading beneath the control in his voice. "No," she managed. "Just shaken." "That was not a random attempt," he said, jaw tight. "That was the Kurosawa family telling me they know exactly where you sleep, exactly which hours you spend in open air, and exactly how little it would cost them to end this conversation permanently." "Then we end it first," Marin said, surprising herself with the steadiness that returned to her voice even as her hands still trembled against the stone beneath her. "I'm not going to sit in a locked room waiting for the next bullet to get lucky." Renji studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that looked almost like the first genuine surprise she had seen from him since the restaurant. "Most people, having just survived that, ask to leave." "I'm not most people," she said. "And frankly, leaving doesn't sound safer anymore. It just sounds like dying somewhere less comfortable." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something closer to recognition. "No," he agreed quietly. "It would not be safer at all." That night, after the security sweep confirmed the building clear and Hiro had doubled the watch on every entrance, Maren found herself unable to sleep, the memory of concrete dust stinging her arm replaying behind closed eyes each time she tried. She found Renji on the same rooftop hours later, standing exactly where the shooter's angle would have caught him too, an act of defiance she suspected was entirely deliberate. "You shouldn't be standing there," she said, coming to stand beside him despite her own advice. "Neither should you." But he did not move away, and neither did she. They stood in silence for a long moment, the city spread out beneath them indifferent to the war being quietly waged within it, and Maren became acutely aware of the small distance between his hand and hers on the railing, a distance that felt engineered by both of them rather than accidental. "Tell me about her," Maren said finally. "Your sister. You don't have to. But I think I'd understand you better if I knew." Renji was quiet long enough that she thought he might refuse. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual precision, roughened by something old and unhealed. "Her name was Aiko. She believed, the way I once did, that intelligence could substitute for protection. She was wrong, and I was too slow to correct that belief before it cost her everything. I built this entire operation afterward around one principle. Anyone who works for me, who matters to me, does not go unprotected the way she did. I have kept that principle for 6 years without exception." "And now," he said, turning to face her fully, close enough that she could see the exhaustion beneath his composure, "I find myself wondering whether protecting you is the same principle at all, or something I have not allowed myself to name yet." The honesty of it landed harder than the gunfire had. Maren did not step back. "What would you call it if you did name it?" "Something considerably more dangerous than professional obligation," he said quietly. "Something I told myself I would not permit myself to feel again after Aiko. And yet here we are." She should have stepped back. She understood, distantly, that this was precisely the kind of moment the entire slow architecture of the last weeks had been building toward, and some cautious part of her mind flagged the danger of it even as her body refused to move away. "I told myself staying here was survival instinct," she admitted. "That I was only doing what kept me alive. I don't think that's entirely true anymore." "No," Renji said low, certain. "I do not think it is either." He did not close the distance between them, not yet, some final restraint holding him in place even now, but his hand found hers on the railing, deliberate and unhurried, and she did not pull away. The city below continued its indifferent glittering, unaware that two people standing very still above had just admitted something neither of them could take back. The Kurosawa family did not wait long to escalate. 3 days after the rooftop shooting, Hiro burst into the study where Maren worked, his usual composure cracked wide open. "They have Renji," he said. "Ambushed at the harbor meeting. 4 men down on our side. No confirmation yet on his condition." Maren's stomach dropped through the floor. "Where?" "You're not going anywhere near that location." "I can read the shorthand they use in their internal communications," she said, already moving toward the door. "If they left any message behind, any note, any demand, I can translate it faster and more accurately than anyone else in this building. Take me or don't, but I am not sitting here doing nothing while he might be dying somewhere." Hiro searched her face for a long moment, then made a decision that clearly cost him something. "Stay close. Do exactly as I say." The warehouse at the harbor's edge stank of salt and gasoline, and Maren's hands were steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs when she stepped through the shattered door. Renji sat bound to a chair in the center of the room, blood dried along his temple, his suit torn at the shoulder, but his eyes were sharp and alert, and something in them flickered with fury the moment he saw her walk through that door instead of staying safely away. "You should not be here," he said immediately, voice rough but controlled. "Neither should you, apparently, but here we both are." She crossed the room before Hiro could stop her, kneeling to examine the note pinned to the chair beside him, dense formal script demanding Renji's surrender of the harbor routes in exchange for his life, a deadline set for dawn. "It's not just a ransom," Maren said, reading quickly. "There's a secondary clause here, written smaller, meant to be missed. They're demanding I be handed over as well, as proof of good faith. They want the translator silenced permanently, as part of the terms." Rinji's jaw tightened, something dangerous moving behind his eyes despite the ropes holding him in place. That will not happen. I didn't say I was agreeing to it, Marin said, already scanning the room for anything useful, her mind working faster than her fear. I'm saying we don't have until dawn to figure out how to refuse it safely. Hiro's men worked quickly to cut Rinji free while Marin kept watch on the warehouse entrance, and it was in that tense, narrow window of time that she noticed the second note tucked beneath the chair, one the Kurosawa family clearly had not intended anyone but their own courier to find. She read it fast, her breath catching. They're not planning to honor the exchange even if you agree, she said. This second note is instructions to their own men. They intend to kill you regardless the moment the routes are signed over. The ransom was never a real negotiation. Rinji, finally free of the ropes, rose slowly, favoring one side where a fresh bruise was already darkening beneath torn fabric. Then we do not negotiate at all. Then we take the fight to them before dawn, Marin said, on our terms instead of theirs. He looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and unguarded moving across his face, gratitude and fury, and something warmer underneath both. You continue to be the last person in this war anyone expected to matter this much. Get used to it, she said. I'm not planning on going anywhere. The counterstrike came together in the hours before dawn with a precision that surprised even Hiro. Marin's translation of the Kurosawa family's own intercepted communications, giving Rinji's people the exact timing and location of the rival family's central meeting. Rinji moved through the resulting confrontation exactly as she had first suspected he would that night at the restaurant, economical and lethal, every action deliberate, nothing wasted, and when it was over, the head of the Kurosawa family lay dead by Rinji's own hand, and the routes remained precisely where they had always belonged. Marin stood at the edge of the warehouse district as the sun finally broke over the water, her hands still faintly trembling from adrenaline that had not yet finished leaving her body, and watched Rinji cross the wet pavement toward her, blood on his knuckles, his suit ruined beyond repair, his eyes finding hers before he had even fully closed the distance between them. It's over, he said, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze.
For now, she said.
There will be another Kurosawa family, eventually. There always is in your world. Perhaps. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that felt entirely unlike the violence his hands had carried out only an hour before. But there will not be another translator who walked into that warehouse for me instead of staying safe on the other side of the city. I told you, I'm not most people. No, he agreed, his voice low, certain, finally free of every careful restraint he had held on to since the night at the restaurant. You are the only person I have allowed close enough to matter since Aiko. I did not intend to let that happen again. I am no longer interested in fighting it. Good, Marin said, closing the last of the distance between them herself, refusing to be the one who waited passively for the moment to be given to her. Because I stopped fighting it around the time you took a bullet's worth of risk standing beside me on that rooftop. He kissed her there in the gray early light above the harbor, unhurried despite everything that had happened in the hours before, and Marin understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was not choosing safety by staying. She was choosing him, fully aware of every danger that came attached to that choice, in the same deliberate way she had chosen to walk into a warehouse instead of waiting safely behind for news. 3 weeks later, Marin stood in the same restaurant where all of it had started, not in a uniform this time, but in a dress Rinji had insisted on buying himself, dark green silk that had nothing modest about the way it fit her. The staff who had once overlooked her without a second glance now greeted her with a careful, uncertain respect, uncertain of exactly what she had become to the man now seated at what had once been table 12, waiting for her with the same stillness he'd carried since the night she first read his rival's declaration of war aloud in a language no one expected her to know. Sentimental, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Bringing me back here. Strategic, he corrected, though the almost smile at the corner of his mouth gave away the lie. I wanted to remember exactly where I decided you were worth every risk that followed. And now that you've remembered? He reached across the table, his hand closing over hers with the same deliberate certainty he brought to every decision that mattered to him, no hesitation left in it at all. Now I intend to make certain no one ever mistakes what you are to me again. Not the Kurosawa family. Not my own men. Not you. If you ever find yourself doubting it on a night, I am not there to say it plainly. Marin looked at him across the table, at the scar through his eyebrow and the ink disappearing beneath his collar, and the eyes that had once catalogued her like a puzzle worth solving, and now looked at her like an answer he had already found, and she understood that whatever came next, whatever threat eventually replaced the Kurosawa family in the endless architecture of his world, she would not be waiting somewhere safe for someone else to decide the outcome. Then don't let go, she said simply. He did not. If you made it this far into their story, let me know in the comments what part hit you hardest, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more dark romance stories just like this one.